I don't think playing for elite managers, outside interests are going to be allowed to affect your core proposition. If he's got anything about him, brains-wise, and there was a debate in that particular. Welcome to this week's edition of One-2-One with Simon Jordan. Don't forget to keep liking and subscribing as we pursue our 1 million subscribers. And of course, equally as importantly, to leave your questions in the comment section below. But let's get on with this week's show. Ralph Rangnick's made some interesting observations about Manchester United, the culture of the players, the attributes that are going to be required, and the necessity to rebuild and the timelines it's going to take. He's indicating 18 months. I think they've had 9 years of erosion. I think they've had 3 years of concentrated attrition. And they've got a group of players in there that are probably not going to be overly turnaroundable, and I think they need to be changed wholesale. Now, I know I disagree with the Bruno Fernandes new contract, and a lot of people think that he's worthy of it. That's a different argument. But the culture of Manchester United and the amount of time it's going to take to achieve what? To be competitive or to overtake Liverpool and Manchester City? I think it's going to take them 5 years to bridge that gap, unless there's a massive deterioration in those two clubs. You've also got, coming up on the riders, Chelsea, that I would have anticipated have done more this season, and they may yet by winning the Champions League and bouncing back from that defeat against Brentford and taking it out against Real Madrid. But I think United have got to get effective leadership in there, effective leadership behind the manager. So that means directors of football, proper people that are operating at the elite level to make sure that their recruitment policy is product specific. And by that I mean not just the best players for what you want Manchester United to look like. What do you want this team to be? Do you want it to be a free-flowing football team that is packed with technically gifted players that can work hard as well? Do you want it to be a counter-attacking side that plays with great venom, a bit like Liverpool? Or do you want it to be a combination of the both? Look at the players, look at each position. It's not a moneyball mentality and going down the Billy Bean route, but I do think that it's going to take them probably 2 years of trading to get the right players in the mix, if the right manager's appointed, and he's given the time to develop the overall aspects of the club. And then once you've got that base, then your building will go up, and then the next 3 years will be United starting to pick up the slack. Jack Grealish is reported to be signing a very lucrative deal with an Italian fashion house, Gucci. Brilliant brand, by the way. Overpriced, I might add. But for him to get these sort of deals, I think are part and parcel of the modern day footballer. If he is playing for Pep Guardiola, I don't think he's going to be allowed to lose his focus. I think these things are the byproduct of being a high profile footballer. Whether people of any substance are going to want to buy Gucci because Jack Grealish wears it is a different discussion, but that's Gucci's prerogative. I don't think playing for elite managers, outside interests are going to be allowed to affect your core proposition. If he's got anything about him, brains-wise, and there was a debate in that particular scenario as to whether he does or not, he's not going to allow it to focus or to take away from his focus. I think Jack Grealish is having a period of consolidation at Man City. It was always going to be difficult for him to fit into a side that was already well-oiled and functioning at a very high level. So I think despite the fact that people are saying he's not setting the world alight at Man City, his manager's happy with him, he's playing more regularly. A Gucci deal or another brand, if he wants to disappear into a rabbit hole, you can look at people like Dele Alli and say, how did all these endorsements help your career? And were they in fact a distraction? But I think Grealish is in an elite football club with an elite winning mentality, and I don't think outside distractions are going to be allowed to affect his football. And if they do, then more for him. Well, I don't think you can argue who it's more important to. You know, Spurs and Arsenal will attach equal importance to it. Conte will want to be in there because he'll have worked the oracle and his hands will be wands. Arteta will have wanted to prove his point that any doubting of his capabilities is long since removed, because he's capable of building a side without the Aubameyangs and with all the challenges about how he handled Kieran Tierney at the beginning of the season and so on and so forth. I think both clubs have an equal desire and an equal need for different reasons. Arsenal have spent money in the last two transfer windows. Tottenham perhaps not as much. The Conte relationship, the Conte factor, with the media outpouring of how this is going to fall apart, how Conte's about to leave out the door, and how he and Daniel Levy are never going to get on, and he was about to go, and I never believed any of that nonsense. But Conte being able to make sure he he gets the players that he wants because they're in a Champions League, can continue the leverage on Daniel Levy, I suspect, Daniel Levy, on getting the money that people ruminate whether he's going to get or not. But for me as a Londoner, I would like to see either one of them, because I think Chelsea are going to get third spot. So you want the balance between the northwest of England or the north of England and the south of England to be equitable. So 2 teams from London inside the top 4 would do quite nicely for me. And which one it is, if I were to choose, I think probably the more deserving is Arsenal. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to move the Premier League to a model where the football clubs aren't dependent upon awful regimes or billionaires that come in, that they're dependent upon good owners that are running the business well, and not necessarily being dependent upon an owner to fund the gaps. So I would want to introduce a situation where the football clubs were self-sustainable and there was a player salary cap or some real governance around financial fair play that said football clubs had to be profitable. I would like to think that I would want to make sure that every introduction and outlook of advancing the Premier League, say for example VAR, was done with the best in practice, the best in class. I'd want to make sure that our version of the VAR made all of the advances that it's supposed to do. I think VAR, in my view, was an advancement of the game. Its implementation was not. And I would like to think that the Premier League led the way in using the power that it's got in financial terms to ensure that the quality of the experience for the end user, being the player and the fan and the officials, met the initial perception. I suppose if I wanted to be really moralistic, and it's very difficult for me to wear 2 hats, because I believe in distributions, I believe that the pyramid is the sum of all its parts. So if I were heading up the Premier League, from my moral standpoint, I would want to distribute more fairly. I would want there to be a distribution mechanism that encouraged the Championship to be a better funded league, that subsequently the Championship fed League 1 and League 2, and there was a better pyramid. Now that wouldn't sit in accord with my remit as the Premier League's chief executive or chairman or whatever the role we're talking about is, because that would be doing something different. That would me be being idealistic. I suppose it's very difficult to pick just 3 things out. I've picked 2, I've picked 3, which is a sort of socialist wish. I suppose the third thing is to keep on advancing the Premier League and to make sure that the next evolution of the Premier League, the real Premier League, the real opportunity is not just signing up broadcast deals with everybody else, is building your own digital platform, owning your own content, and monetising this league to a level that people can't even begin to conceptualise. The idea that you have a middleman like Sky, or you have a middleman like BT, or you have broadcasters around the world, when if in effect you could build a joint venture with whoever that has a Netflix principle where you monetize that to the levels of 100 million subscribers around the world, paying £10 a month, receiving £1 billion a month, 12 billion a year, plus advertising revenue. All of a sudden, you've got a £20 billion a year business rather than the 2.8 billion that you're currently getting from the broadcasters. So I would want to evolve the viewing experience with augmented reality, virtual reality, all kinds of different concepts to drive the game forward, to increase the riches. And then maybe my third example that I gave earlier on about distributing wouldn't be so painful to perhaps the 20 members of the Premier League that I'd be trying to convince, like turkeys voting for Christmas, they should give some more money to the Football League. I wouldn't be, if I was still in charge of a football club, irrespective of which football club that was, and obviously the natural association is Palace, if my manager was for the 5-sub rule, then I'd be for it. If he wasn't, then I'd be against it, unless I had very strong views. Never been in the camp of having a dog and bark, but if you've got 25 players as a squad, I would want my manager to utilise those players to be able to make sure that the very best outcomes can be gotten from the squad of players that I've paid for, that I've bought into the club and have them available for him. So I don't think I'd be against it. I know that there's an argument that suggests it only favours the bigger clubs, but we all play one another. We only play the bigger clubs 12 times a season. The rest of the time, you're playing the other 26 games against comparable teams with comparable squads. So the ability to utilise your squad, and given Palace's squad right now, they've easily got 5, 6, 7 quality players they could rotate. The problem is with bloody football is once it was 3 subs, now it's 5. Next thing you'll hear it'll be 7, and it'll go on and on and on. So the only argument I could possibly maintain is that I'd be paying more appearance bonuses, but in the great scheme of Premier League football and Premier League monies, that's an academic scenario. And I think if the manager wanted 5 subs, then I'd say, okay, that I will carry your message into a Premier League meeting when the voting came to pass. That's it for this week's edition of One-to-One with Simon Jordan. Now don't forget to leave me your opinions on Manchester United, the Premier League full stop, and of course the battle for 4th. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and as important, keep leaving those questions in the comment section below, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week.